Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Roadmaster InvisiBrake proportional braking system for a flat tow setup on a 2021 Jeep Wrangler. And the InvisiBrake gets its name from the fact that a lot of it can be hidden once it's installed, and that's accomplished by actually mounting the module box that creates that vacuum underneath the seat. And this should give you plenty of clearance to where it's not going to cause any issues. It's then run to a cylinder, which runs to a cable and pulley system, which will slow and stop the vehicle when brakes are applied or when your breakaway switch is pulled. So as you can see, with the seat in a normal driving position, you can't see it, and so you retain that OEM appearance. And also, instead of the portable braking systems, this is nice because when you're ready to flat tow, there's no setup really required. It's ready to go. Now, if you look at your pedal, you are going to have a bracket, but you can mount it out of the way and it doesn't become a hindrance while driving normally. Speaking of that bracket, when I pull the breakaway switch or when you're just putting the brakes on the RV while towing, it's going to pull that cable, allowing the pedal to move back, slowing and stopping the vehicle when necessary. Speaking of that breakaway switch, you can see that it is mounted here up front on the vehicle, and this is just going to be quickly connected to the hitch on the vehicle, so in case of accidental disconnect, this will pull and your brakes will be applied. Now, the base plate is going to be one of 5 main components required for flat towing a vehicle. So the base plate is actually attached to the frame of the vehicle, allowing you to make that connection point to the tow bar. Well, the tow bar is going to be the connection point between your base plate and the hitch of the RV. Moving along, we have our safety chains here, and that's just going to make sure that we actually have another connection just in case this was to fail. So this is just an added protection, and this just links up to the holes on our safety chain loops on the base plate to the ones on the hitch of the RV. Now, you also will need a supplemental proportional braking system, and what that's going to do is when you put the brakes on your RV, it's going to send a braking signal to the vehicle, and it's going to allow this vehicle to slow and stop, not only making it safer for you while driving, but also it's going to help stop as this is going to be dragging a little bit behind with those brakes and slowing down the RV. With that, there's also a breakaway switch. So in case our safety chains and our base plate or tow bar fail, this will actually pull this cable, putting the brakes on. That way you don't have a vehicle rolling down the highway. Now you have your diode wiring here as well, and that's going to send signals from our electrical connection on the RV to the vehicle, and it's going to allow this to actually use the light signals from the RV. So when you put your turn signals on, your running lights and brake lights, it's actually going to show up on the vehicle. So that's going to let people know when you're actually signaling or stopping, keeping you safe and legal. Proportional braking system while flat towing a vehicle is actually required by law when you're flat towing a vehicle, and they do a fine job of making sure that you as well as other people on the road stay safe while you're flat towing. Now, the installation of this is a little interesting and tricky, but really it's not that bad, and I think it overall beats out having to put a portable system in place every time, and I never really cared for the way that those sit. This is a great system and it should work perfectly fine for the rest of your flat towing. Now, speaking of that installation, let's actually take a look at it right now. To begin this installation, I highly recommend taking out the seat. It's going to open up a lot of room to be able to work. You're going to be pulling carpet up, and really even with the seat fully back, it's going to be pretty tricky. And as far as mounting up the actual module itself for the box, it's going to also be tricky. So really suggest do that. It's really easy to do. You're just going to want to use a T50 Torx bit, and you're going to have 4 of these. So moving your seat around, you'll be able to actually get to these pretty easily. So there's one here, there's one there, one back here, and then one up here. This one's a little tricky to get to, so you'll want an extension on a socket. Now, I will admit, they're a little tricky. You can see some thread lock on there, so they're gonna fight you, and it's gonna make some kind of interesting noises for the first couple goes, and then after that, it'll get loose. So, again, this is a step that I really recommend, and you'll see why as I kind of show you the rest of the actual braking system. So here we actually have the InvisiBrake system, the box that actually controls the pressure and it causes the actual air vacuum, so that's going to put our pressure on the brake, and all of our connections really go from this box out towards the rest of the vehicle. So mounting your InvisiBrake underneath the driver's seat is going to be the best option in my opinion, because it does clear. I've checked to make sure the clearance is, and also you'll actually be able to adjust it kind of pretty easily. You can hop out of the driver's seat. The gauge is going to be kind of hard to see, but honestly this is kind of the best way that it works out. There's a little bump that has the spot for the floor mat to pop in. I was able to actually put that into a opening on the bottom here, which holds it kind of nicely in place, and then I just simply took 2 self tappers and zipped those in. So unfortunately you may lose the ability to have this rear floor mat, but again, this is going to be a nice clean spot and allow the install to go a little bit smoother. You'll see you have a clip here, and this is going to match our colors that we ran to our diode system. So these actually splice into the diode wiring. So that's something too when you're running your diode lights. I highly recommend pulling about a couple extra foot up into the engine bay. It's going to make it a lot easier to splice these in. So these are going to be tying in color to color. So our 4 wires that we ran for the diode, we'll splice these into each other. So this will tie into our diode connection under the hood. This is going to run to the underside of the hood, as well as this is going to feed to our breakaway switch, as well as run to power and our negative. So this will all have to go through the firewall. This is just tubing that I put onto the nipple there to run our actual air line out to the engine bay to tie into the brake booster. So again, all 3 of these, bundling those together will make it a lot easier to do one run through the actual grommet. Now this little hose is the smaller diameter one that's in the kit. I'll pull this up and kind of show you the layout. And a lot of pulling this carpet up is going to be pretty easy. They have these nice little pops in place. So you just kind of pull those back. You may have to pull them out a little bit from the plastic, but not too terribly bad. Something else I'll mention, when you pull out your seat, you're going to have 2 plugs. You'll want to pry these out just to make it a little bit easier, as this will also keep it attached. But go ahead, separate those, and you're going to want to take those off before pulling your seat out. So under here, this small little hose, this is actually connecting to our cylinder, and our cylinder is what is doing the magic of pulling the cable of our brake. So you can see we've just mounted this up with the wire loom clamp here, nice and secure, and then we have our cable that's going to run to our pulley. So just kind of an overview, this little guy is going from our push connect fitting to the push connect fitting on here. Trying to make sure that this is kind of at a flat angle. The way this sits, it kind of protects it from getting crimped, but you don't want this kinked up. So move that around to where you're happy with it, and you can attach those. I've gone ahead and I've attached all 3 of these together just with some zip ties to kind of bundle them up. It's going to make it a lot easier to run it through the firewall grommet to get to our engine bay. Now, I've also just kind of tied in our brake cable once we get a little bit further here, and that's going to be underneath this plastic. Now to get these out, it's kind of tricky. You have these clips here. You just kind of pry underneath and it should work your way along and you'll get that loose. And really, as you're running these wires, trying to make sure that you leave these actual clip-in places open. It does get a little bit tight here on the hump, but you should be able to get it to where it'll snap back in place. And again, just kind of throwing a few zip ties along the way is going to help. Now, as far as this cable goes, you want to make sure that it's not kinked as well, because this will actually cause that cable to bind up a little bit. So in the instruction manual, they'll kind of show you the radius that you can do for the maximum amount of bend. Ours, just because of the way this is laid out, this is about kind of not the maximum, but this is about what you'd want to stick with if you're making turns. So again, just kind of connecting these all. And then what I did here was I ran my 3 that I bundled up that'll go through the firewall grommet, and I just kind of ran it underneath these plastics, and then I'll show you where they come out over there. Peeling back my carpet here, this is going to expose kind of the routing of wires as well as my brake cable itself. And you'll be able to see kind of the mounting positions of our pulley. So this is kind of tricky as the carpet's kind of formed to the vehicle. So just take your time, make sure that you have all the clips popped out, and then just slowly peel it back until you find a nice spot it can actually stay back. So I actually used the accelerator pedal to kind of hold this for us. And so you can't see the wires that I ran over here. They are just kind of tucked up in here. And what I did is I just simply put them right here. You can actually see this wire loom that I wrapped around. I just did that to make it look a little bit cleaner here. And it just simply runs up. And the grommet does live kind of high up here. It's actually easier to get to, I think, from the firewall on the engine bay. You'll see it. That it's kind of got two little tabs that you can kind of twist it out. So running it through there is going to be your best option. Something else I'll point out while we're here is I've gone ahead and removed this plastic panel underneath the steering wheel. The reason being is we're going to need to put a stoplight switch. And what that's going to do is have a little plunger, so when the brake is depressed, it'll actually send a signal to the front of our vehicle, which will attach to another electrical wire all the way up to the front of the RV, which will set our indicator light and let us know when it's actually going to be braking. So for that, it's pretty easy, as there is a bracket that is good for these Wranglers. The bracket actually mounts to a factory stud, and you're going to be using the factory nut to get that in place. The stoplight switch just simply screws into that, and you'll be able to adjust the actual plunger distance on the pedal, but it basically just rests on the metal part of the brake pedal, and there will be two wires coming off of that. Now, we will be extending those wires. They give you a red and a green. It doesn't matter which one you tie into because it's a momentary switch. So those two wires I extended with the wiring from the kit. Those will also pass through the firewall grommet to the engine bay. So that's going to really cover all of our electrical that's going to be running into the engine bay through the grommet. So while we're here, let's button up the rest of this inside. And really, that's just going to be the actual cable mechanism that's going to pull on the brake when we call for it. And so that you can see our cable here. I just went and use these little clamps here. Now, when putting self-tapping screws in all of this, you want to check underneath to make sure that you're not going to hit anything. These tend to be fairly safe, but up here you can actually run into a lot of issues. So my suggestion, drill a small hole, or kind of go underneath, get a reference point, kind of knock on it maybe with a buddy. That way you can kind of see where it's going to poke out at. And it's going to be hard to see because on the other side there's actually heat shielding. So this seems to be a pretty safe place. Now I want you to double check your own vehicle just in case there's some variances on yours. One of the issues that you will have to kind of work around is this is where one of those plugs is to actually keep that carpet in place. Unfortunately, with it right here, it's not going to work that great. So what I ended up doing was actually pulling it apart, and you'll have this is a 17 millimeter plastic nut with threads on it, and that's going to hold the carpet in place. So what I did, just kind of notched this, and that's going to allow it to actually have a space here, kind of by the pulley. So with that, we'll be able to get our carpet back. Now you are going to be trimming some carpet as well to make room for the pulley. There's really no way to get around that, but I'll put my carpet back in place and show you how that works. But the basic gist of this, you're going to want to, again, stay in those smaller radiuses when you have to make curves. So I kind of did that, and once you have it in a safe spot, you can put those clamps in place. You then have this little clamp here for the actual end of our cable pull. And really what you're looking for is that you have a 1/4 inch of a little bit of play here. You want that ball to kind of be able to kind of click around a little bit, not too loose. Good thing is you can actually adjust it pretty easily with the actual nuts on the threaded portion of that. Your bracket, you want it a little bit above your pedal, kind of at a nice angle. Checking the instruction manual, they go really into detail of how to actually lay it out, but this is a pretty typical for an InvisiBrake setup here of what it'll look like. So when putting your carpet back, just make sure you kind of tuck it back underneath the plastic here. And really what I did when trimming mine to make it easy is I actually kind of just flapped it over the pulley system itself, and just with a utility knife, make sure it's nice and sharp, or if you have some sharp shears, you can kind of just trim out. Now you'll see I left a little bit where this cable actually goes through, that way it's not rubbing against it. The rest of this portion should be fine as it's sitting flat. There's not a whole lot of resistance or things for it to catch on. So that part that I modified, I'll show you kind of what I did here. This is simply going to just kind of sit that little notch there. That's going to allow it to kind of sit next to this pulley. Before it was a full circle and it wouldn't clear, as you can kind of see as I rotate it. So this is just, you know, a tip that I've kind of learned along the way. You don't have to do this, but it's going to be nice to have that carpet. You don't have to do this, but this is definitely a tip that I think it keeps it a little bit more OEM. It's going to keep that carpet from pulling back over time as well. So you can see here, I can actually just tighten this down, and that's going to hold our carpet in place. So the grommet that we passed everything through is going to be on the right side of your brake booster, and you're going to see two little tabs on the side, and the thought being that you can just twist that out. It is kind of tricky to get to, especially with somewhat larger hands, and it's kind of hard to actually twist itself. So I grabbed just a pair of pliers, pulled on that tab, and what I did is I actually just took a step bit, drilled that out, and then passed everything through it. That way I could just put my grommet back in place. And I'm gonna go back with a little black silicone, and that way it's still a watertight seal once it's all passed through. So you can see I have all my wires in this loom. I've just wrapped it up in some wire loom just to make it look a little bit cleaner. I also have my air line going here as well. So we have those 3 bundles that we, so our air line, the 2 plugs that went to the actual InvisiBrake itself, as well as those 2 wires that I extended off the brake light switch. So what I've done is I've kind of just, I have it all kind of tucked away, but I can show you which wires pass over. So in our wire loom here, we're going to have our red wire that we actually had off of our brake light switch. That's going to need to run over to power, as well as you'll see the red and black wire. That's one of those ones that plugged into the InvisiBrake. So pretty much we're just tying into the battery. So I had to run it across to the passenger side to get there. And the best way I've found is kind of use these brackets. You can kind of tuck this along in here, just kind of making it look clean. And then once we made it over here, I'll show you that connection. So I've gone ahead and just kind of routed this down, and then I ran my negative, the black. This was split off of that red and black that were together. So that's the one coming from the InvisiBrake. And then from there, I have my 2 powers. I simply connected those with some heat shrink butt connectors, mostly because under an engine bay, it has the potential to be exposed to water or just elements in general. So these are really nice. They help protect the actual connection points and keep them really robust. From there, I went ahead and I've attached my fuse holders. I've labeled them as well. Our stoplight switch is only a 10 amp fuse, whereas our actual InvisiBrake is going to be 20. So I just kind of made some permanent marker marks on here. But pretty much from there, I just went ahead and attached those to our power terminal. So the 4 wires that are attached together, you have your white, your brown, your yellow, and green. Those are going to be coming from the InvisiBrake through your firewall. And as I mentioned earlier, when you run your diodes, I highly suggest pulling up an extra amount here, maybe just a foot or 2, and that way you can make these connections, splicing them in. Best way to do that, you're just going to cut those, and with a butt connector, you're simply just going to attach the 2 ends on one and one on the other, heat shrink them down. You'll also, on the white one, you're going to want to tie off an extra white, and really all that is so you have a ground. And there is a factory grounding point kind of on the right here of the brake booster. So I put a ring terminal on and attached that. So once you have your 4 wires tied into the other 4 wires from the diode, you have all those actually connected. You have your ground run. This little green is the one we extended off that brake light switch, and I extended that. That's going to be to the plug that's going to allow us to connect to run that light signal up to the RV. So you'll find in your kit a little female connector, and that's going to be just a small black wire. We're going to go ahead and attach it to our green, and that just made its way up here. That's going to allow us to jumper to our RV, and that way again we have that indication light when we have our brakes applied. You'll also see that we have our double black insulated plug, and that's going to be just kind of a stepped looking plug that runs up and connects to our breakaway switch, and that way if in case of an accidental disconnect, that'll actually put the brakes on the vehicle. So pretty easy connection there. So just run that out. You'll have plenty of extra. So you may find spots along the way that you want to tie it up, but the best thing I can recommend is run all your stuff and then figure out where your excess is. Make sure you have enough out the gate.
Now your breakaway switch is going to have a plug like this, and that's simply going to plug into the corresponding piece, and that black wire is going to run all the way back to our actual module.
And that pretty much takes care of our electrical. Those 4 wires that we spliced into will run to our 6-pole. And that's going to do it for that. Now we will be tying into the pneumatics, allowing us to pull air pressure to create pressure to pull that cable. And the way we do that is tying into the factory brake booster line. So pretty easy here. It can be a little bit scary cutting into your brake line, but really off your master cylinder, you're going to want to find this line, and you're going to have a bunch of different hoses in the kit. I found the kind of medium size here. I was able to slide over the actual hard plastic that they have for the lines from the factory. You'll just put your T in place, and throughout all of this, if you have a little bit of spray silicone or penetrating oil, it's going to help kind of move it along on this rubber a lot easier than trying to just shove it on. So really, you'll have this just connecting. It's just one big loop, so that way you can actually keep the actual brake booster line continuous, but we do put a one-way check valve, and what that does is making sure that we're not pulling any air pressure from the engine itself, so really it can only pull suction one way. So when you do cut into your brake booster line, you're going to want to try to do it on a straight area. If it is on a curve, which this one does curve down, it's going to be really tricky to make those connections without it wanting to kind of crimp down and potentially not have full air to be able to run through there because it's kinked. So I did end up cutting a little bit down here and pulling some of this sleeving style back just with some shears, and that way I was able to make that connection here. Again, so this is just one big loop that we had from essentially our factory brake booster with this T in line. Just make sure you put your one-way check valve. And then pretty easy here with our T, this is our air line that we pass through our grommet. Now something I would recommend is making sure that you don't put your fuses in the fuse holders until you are completely done. That way there's no power running through it. That kind of stops it from sending power back. So once you have everything in place, get your fuses in the correct spot, and then we can go ahead and actually test the braking system. Now the best way to test it out right away is to pull the breakaway switch. And you should be able to hear that compressor kind of working inside the vehicle, but you might as well go in and check to make sure that it's actually actuating. So now at this point, you're ready to button up any loose ends that you may have, get your seat back in place, and then you're ready to hook up to your RV. Now the other end of our monitor cable is going to route to the actual front of the RV, where it's going to tie into 12-volt power, and that way you'll have an indication light that you can mount on your dash and let you know when those brakes are actually working on the towed vehicle behind you. So the best way to do this is you're just going to simply run the wires, and you're going to find a nice spot along the frame rail or some factory wiring to make your way to the front of the vehicle, just kind of putting some zip ties up here and there. Now when you get to the front, you can find a nice clean panel to actually take a hole, drill it through, and run your light in, and then the sticker will just go over it. So whatever spot is nice and easy for the driver to see will work fine, assuming that you have clearance behind that plastic panel. You then simply just tie into power, and then your actual cable that you ran is going to run into your white wire. So pretty simple, and it's a nice indication to let you know while you're driving that your brakes are actually working. And that was a look and installation of the Roadmaster InvisiBrake on a 2021 Jeep Wrangler.